The most unhinged guests Johnny Carson ever had. Johnny Carson was the man who could control anyone, until these guests completely lost their minds. For over 30 years, Carson ruled late-night television with calm, wit, and absolute authority. Presidents, movie stars, and comedians all played by his rules. But every so often, someone walked onto that couch who didn't care about the rules, didn't fear the cameras, and didn't stop when things went too far. Drunken meltdowns, sexual shockers, screaming matches, walk-offs on live television. Moments so chaotic that even Johnny Carson, the unshakable king of late night, couldn't hide his discomfort. These aren't just awkward interviews. They're the most unhinged guests Johnny Carson ever faced, and the moments TV could never get away with today. Arnold Schwarzenegger. The moment Johnny Carson lost control. In 1979, long before he became the Terminator, long before politics, blockbusters, and legendary catchphrases, Arnold Schwarzenegger walked onto The Tonight Show as something far more dangerous. A man who didn't know, or didn't care, how television was supposed to work. Johnny Carson had seen everything by then. Divas. Egomaniacs. He had spent decades mastering the art of control, guiding conversations with a smile so effortless it felt invisible. The Tonight Show wasn't just a program, it was a carefully choreographed performance, and Johnny was its conductor. Arnold, however, arrived like a wrecking ball disguised as a guest. At first, everything felt normal. Arnold sat there, massive and confident, radiating the kind of physical presence that pulled the air out of the room. Carson, relaxed, curious, asked about bodybuilding, about training, about the pump, that familiar sensation athletes describe when blood floods the muscles. It was a safe question, a technical question, the kind of question Carson had asked thousands of times. But Arnold didn't answer like a guest. He answered like a man speaking from pure instinct. He leaned forward and said it, not as a joke, not as a wink, but with complete sincerity. The pump is like having sex with a woman and coming. Time froze. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't gasp. They went silent, because in 1979, network television simply didn't allow words like that to exist. Johnny Carson's face changed in real time. The practiced smile stiffened. His eyes widened just enough. And then Arnold kept going. He didn't sense the boundary he had shattered. He didn't slow down. He doubled down, describing pleasure, release, obsession, using language that bypassed innuendo and went straight for raw confession. This wasn't shock comedy. This was cultural collision. Behind the cameras, producers panicked. Phones rang in the control booth. Network executives demanded answers. Carson tugged at his tie, the telltale sign longtime viewers recognized as his personal distress signal. He tried to steer the conversation back, tried to redirect, tried to save the moment with humor. "Well, I certainly wouldn't know about that," he said, landing a line that got nervous laughter, not because it was funny, but because the audience needed release. Arnold, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. To him, this wasn't scandal. This was honesty. A young immigrant, still learning America's rules, speaking with the confidence of a man who believed charisma could overpower consequence. And in a strange way, he wasn't wrong. The segment ended, but the damage was already done. Carson reportedly turned to Ed McMahon during the break and joked about the FCC, but the joke barely covered the shock. And yet, here's the twist. That moment didn't end Arnold Schwarzenegger's career. It foreshadowed it. The same unfiltered confidence that horrified America also hinted at something magnetic, unstoppable. Carson never mentioned the incident again. Arnold wasn't invited back for years. When he finally returned, he was polished, trained, controlled. But the myth had already been born. This wasn't just an awkward interview. It was the night raw authenticity collided with broadcast restraint, and won. Johnny Carson survived it as he always did. But for one unforgettable moment, the king of late night didn't lead the show. He held on while history happened in front of him. Burt Reynolds and DeLuise, when friendship turned The Tonight Show into a battlefield. By 1974, Johnny Carson believed he understood chaos. He had spent more than a decade sitting behind that desk, calmly absorbing the unpredictable energy of celebrities who mistook the Tonight Show couch for a playground. But what happened the night Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise appeared together wasn't chaos born of ego or intoxication, it was something far more dangerous. It was familiarity, friendship, and the mistaken belief that Johnny Carson's stage was just another living room where rules didn't apply. Burt Reynolds was one of Carson's favorites. Charming, quick, impossibly relaxed. The kind of guest who made hosting look easy. Dom DeLuise, on the other hand, was pure kinetic energy, physical comedy incarnate. A man whose humor lived in motion, not words. When they walked out together, smiling like co-conspirators, Carson sensed something brewing. He joked about it. He always joked when instinct whispered trouble. But even Johnny couldn't have predicted how quickly control would evaporate. It started harmlessly. Dom brought out a can of whipped cream, claiming it was for a cooking demonstration. Carson raised an eyebrow. The audience chuckled. Burt smirked. And then, without warning, Dom sprayed Burt directly in the face. The studio exploded with laughter until Burt retaliated. He grabbed a pitcher of water from Carson's desk and dumped it straight down Dom's pants. In seconds, The Tonight Show transformed from an interview into an all-out food fight. Carson laughed, at first. He always laughed first. But then the chaos spread. Chairs shifted. The carpet soaked. And suddenly, Burt Reynolds turned the whipped cream on Johnny himself, drawing a white line across the host's pristine suit. That's when the smile cracked. "That's a $500 suit," Carson snapped. Not joking, not acting. For a rare moment, irritation pierced the armor. Behind the scenes, producers froze. This wasn't a bit. This wasn't scripted. This was live television losing its structure in real time. Carson tried to regain control, but Dom and Burt were no longer performing for the show, they were performing at it. The desk dripped. The set was ruined. The clock kept ticking. And Carson still had more guests scheduled. During the commercial break, cleanup crews rushed in while Carson muttered what many hosts would never admit aloud. "This is why you don't book friends. They think they can get away with murder." When cameras came back up, Carson had changed jackets, but the damage remained. Wet carpet, stained furniture, visible aftermath. The hurricane had passed, but the wreckage told the story. Yet here's what made the moment legendary. Carson didn't punish them. He didn't scold. The next night, he joked about it in his monologue, turning humiliation into humor, chaos into folklore. Burt sent him a replacement suit. Dom sent industrial carpet cleaner. And while they were both welcomed back, they were never invited together again. This wasn't just a mess. It was a lesson. That The Tonight Show wasn't fragile, but it wasn't invincible either. That even Johnny Carson, the master of control, could be overwhelmed, not by malice, but by people who forgot where they were. And maybe that's why the moment endures. Because for once, the desk didn't protect Johnny. The rules didn't matter. And television showed us something raw. What happens when friendship forgets boundaries, and the king of late night has to smile through the storm? Zsa Zsa Gabor, glamour without breaks. By the time Zsa Zsa Gabor sat down on Johnny Carson's couch in 1979, she wasn't just a guest, she was a force of nature wrapped in diamonds and perfume. Johnny had hosted her dozens of times before. He knew the accent, the flirtation, the outrageous stories delivered with a laugh and a wink. Zsa Zsa was chaos, yes, but it was usually manageable chaos. That night, however, she arrived with something different in her purse. Not a joke. Not a story. Proof. The interview began like a familiar dance. Zsa Zsa swept onto the stage, kissed Johnny, called him darling, and settled into her seat as the audience applauded. Carson leaned back, relaxed. This was safe territory. He asked about travel, about Europe, about her latest adventures along the French Riviera. A harmless question. And that's when Zsa Zsa reached into her handbag. Without hesitation, without warning, she pulled out a tiny gold bikini and held it triumphantly in the air. "This, Johnny darling," she announced, "is what I was wearing when I met my husband on the beach in Cannes." The audience roared. Carson froze. He reached for his water glass as if buying himself time to process what he was seeing. The bikini wasn't symbolic. It wasn't tasteful. It was barely there. And Zsa Zsa wasn't finished. She launched into a story, graphic, suggestive, unapologetic, about how that swimsuit had worked its magic, how men followed her, how temptation was inevitable when beauty was wielded without shame. Johnny tried to intervene. He always did. A gentle joke. A polite redirection. But Zsa brushed it aside with a flick of her jeweled hand. Privacy, she insisted, was for people who had nothing worth showing. She named names. Famous names. Married names. Somewhere in the control booth, network censors panicked. There was no delay button back then. Every word went straight into American living rooms. And then she crossed the line that turned the moment from outrageous to unforgettable. She insisted Johnny hold the bikini top against his chest, for the camera. Carson hesitated, trapped between dignity and disaster. He complied, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and survival. It was an image that would live on for decades, the most controlled man on television holding evidence of someone else's excess. What made Zsa Zsa different wasn't recklessness or substance. It was fearlessness. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't apologetic. She existed entirely beyond the boundaries that defined everyone else on that stage. Carson, usually the navigator, was now just a passenger. When the segment finally ended, Johnny handed the bikini back with 2 fingers, as if it were radioactive. Off camera, phones rang. Complaints came in. Men mentioned on air were furious. Carson's response was simple and telling. "Gentlemen, I'm just the host. I have as much control over Zsa Zsa Gabor as I do over a natural disaster." And that was the truth. That night wasn't about scandal. It was about a woman who refused restraint, and a host who understood that sometimes the only way to survive the storm is to let it pass. Red Foxx, no smoke, no joke? In 1975, Red Foxx wasn't just a comedian, he was a cultural revolution. Sanford and Son had turned him into one of the biggest stars on television, a boundary-pushing voice who brought raw, unapologetic comedy into American living rooms. Johnny Carson admired him, respected him. Booking Red Foxx was a coup. But before Foxx ever reached the Tonight Show couch, the trouble had already begun. Backstage, a production assistant delivered what should have been a routine reminder. NBC had implemented a new no-smoking policy on set. For Red Foxx, a lifelong chain smoker who treated cigarettes like punctuation, this wasn't a rule. It was an insult. His voice echoed through the hallway. No smoke, no joke. Producers rushed in, trying to explain. Network policy. Non-negotiable. Foxx paced, furious, feeling disrespected before he'd even been introduced. When the cameras came back from commercial, America saw none of that. Just Johnny Carson, smiling, welcoming the legendary comedian with warmth. Foxx walked out, shook Johnny's hand and sat down, but the tension was immediate. His body was stiff. His eyes burned. And instead of answering the first friendly question, Foxx went straight for the wound. "Johnny, they tell me I can't smoke out here." The audience shifted. This wasn't a bit. Carson tried to laugh it off, gently explaining it wasn't his rule. Foxx didn't care. He talked about respect, about years in the business, about double standards. If other stars could drink on TV, why couldn't he smoke? The laughter drained from the room. What remained was discomfort, real, unfiltered, live. Carson tried humor. He tried empathy. He even offered camaraderie. "Maybe after the show, we can both sneak outside for a smoke," he joked. It was meant as a bridge. It became a trigger. Foxx stood up. "I don't perform where I'm not respected." And then, unthinkable for The Tonight Show, he walked off. No punchline. No handshake. Just silence. Carson turned to Ed McMahon, stunned, and finally spoke. "Well, I guess we'll be going to commercial a little early tonight." Behind the scenes, chaos erupted. Producers scrambled. NBC executives were livid. No one walked out on Johnny Carson. It just wasn't done. Carson, ever the professional, returned from break and smoothed it over for the audience, never assigning blame on air. But privately, the wound lingered. Johnny wasn't angry about the cigarette. He was angry about the breach of trust. To him, disagreements were handled backstage. On camera, you delivered a show. Foxx had broken the one rule Carson held sacred. Once the red light is on, you protect the audience. The incident became legend. Years passed before Red Fox was invited back. And Carson, reflecting on it later, summed it up with dry wisdom earned the hard way. 30 years in television taught me one thing: never open with a question about smoking. Truman Capote. When the show became a rescue mission. By the time Truman Capote walked onto The Tonight Show in 1975, Johnny Carson already sensed something was wrong. This wasn't the Truman Capote he knew, the razor-sharp wit, the mischievous smile, the literary genius who once dazzled America with In Cold Blood. This man moved slowly, unsteadily. His eyes drifted, unfocused, as if he were already somewhere else. For the first time in years, The Tonight Show couch didn't feel like a stage. It felt like a warning. Carson admired Capote deeply. He had welcomed him many times before, especially during the height of his fame, when Truman was brilliant, playful, alive. But fame had taken its toll. Alcohol and drugs had hollowed him out, and on this night, millions of viewers were about to witness not entertainment, but a collapse in progress. From the moment Capote sat down, the illusion unraveled. His speech slurred. His thoughts wandered. Carson opened with a gentle question about writing, an easy lifeline. Capote grabbed it and immediately let go. His answer drifted into fragments. Names that weren't there. Grievances half-formed. He rambled about betrayal, about beautiful people who had wronged him, about secrets he still intended to expose. The audience chuckled at first, unsure. Then the laughter faded. This wasn't eccentricity. This was pain. Carson didn't interrupt. He nodded. He listened. He tried again. Simpler questions, softer prompts. Each one was another rope tossed into deep water. None were caught. Capote dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief, smearing makeup across his face. The cameras caught everything. The silence grew heavier by the second. Then Carson asked about Perry Smith, the murderer from In Cold Blood. It was meant as a safe pivot, a familiar topic. Instead, it broke something open. Capote spoke of Smith as if he were still alive, his voice cracking, his eyes filling with tears. He spoke of understanding, of loneliness, of being used. In that moment, the audience wasn't watching an interview. They were watching a man unravel in public. Carson knew it had gone too far. This wasn't a moment to be clipped or replayed. It wasn't viral. It was human fragility laid bare. He signaled for an early commercial break, something he almost never did. As the cameras cut away, Johnny leaned toward Truman and placed a steadying hand on his arm. Not as a host, as a person. When the show returned, Truman Capote was gone. Carson didn't explain. He didn't joke. He moved on seamlessly, protecting Capote's dignity in the only way he could, by refusing to turn the breakdown into spectacle. Behind the scenes, he made sure someone escorted Truman back to his hotel. He insisted he not be left alone. Crew members later recalled Johnny's quiet concern. "Make sure he's okay," he kept saying. "Make sure someone's with him." Years later, Carson never mocked the interview. Never replayed it. Never used it for laughs. When asked about difficult guests, he spoke carefully. "Sometimes people aren't at their best," he said. "And when that happens, my job isn't to exploit it." That night, The Tonight Show stopped being a show. It became an act of compassion. And in doing so, Johnny Carson reminded everyone watching that true professionalism isn't about control. It's about knowing when to stop, when to protect, and when to choose humanity over ratings. Madonna. The night Johnny Carson was truly flustered. By 1987, Madonna didn't walk into a television studio. She invaded it. She wasn't just a pop star anymore. She was controversy personified, a carefully constructed provocation wrapped in lace, attitude, and total self-awareness. When she stepped onto The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson immediately sensed the shift in energy. This wasn't a guest coming to promote a movie. This was a challenge. From the moment she sat down, Madonna broke the geometry of the show. Carson was meticulous about space. Distance mattered. It kept control intact. Madonna ignored it completely, sitting closer than any guest ever dared, leaning into Johnny's personal space as if the cameras didn't exist. The audience murmured. Carson smiled, but his body language tightened. The conversation barely began before it tilted. Asked about her upcoming film, Madonna bypassed the safe promotional script and veered straight into sexual territory, teasing scenes that had been cut for being too hot. Her voice dropped. She leaned closer. She knew exactly how far she was pushing, and she pushed further. Then she said it. An explicit line so raw that the network censors hit the delay button. The audio dropped. A dead silence filled living rooms across America. Not once, but repeatedly. The Tonight Show almost never used the delay. That night, it became a lifeline. Behind the scenes, producers panicked. Fingers hovered over the commercial button. Johnny Carson tugged at his tie, the quiet signal that even he was uncomfortable. Madonna wasn't flirting. She was asserting power. Each comment dared Johnny to react, to break, to lose control on his own stage. When she joked about going back to her hotel together, on air, the audience gasped. Carson tried humor, tried sarcasm, tried to reclaim authority. "I'm starting to think I should have booked Mother Teresa tonight," he quipped. The laugh bought him seconds. Madonna took inches. Then she touched him. A hand on Johnny Carson's knee. A line crossed that no guest ever crossed. Ed McMahon laughed loudly, intentionally, jumping in to break the tension. Worked, but barely. Johnny's smile never disappeared, but the strain behind it was unmistakable. This wasn't playful chaos. It was controlled discomfort. The rest of the interview limped forward, Carson skillfully redirecting the conversation toward music, toward safer ground, toward an ending. When it finally came, relief washed over him. Cameras caught Johnny wiping his brow as the show went to commercial. A rare, human moment from a man who prided himself on composure. Afterward, network executives quietly made a request. Madonna would not be booked again during Carson's tenure. Johnny never commented publicly, but off-camera he reportedly summed it up with dry finality. "Next time, let's stick to guests who understand the difference between The Tonight Show and a red light district." Madonna left having achieved exactly what she wanted. She shocked the audience. She rattled the network. And most impressively, she did the unthinkable. She made Johnny Carson flustered. Don Rickles, when chaos kicked down the door. Johnny Carson had a special category for Don Rickles. Not a guest. Not a comedian. A force. Their friendship was built on mutual respect and carefully negotiated chaos. Rickles insulted, Johnny reacted, America laughed. But in 1976, Rickles crossed a line no one else ever dared to approach. He didn't just disrupt The Tonight Show. He hijacked it. The night began like any other. Carson was mid-interview with actor Robert Blake, calmly guiding the conversation, when something shifted backstage. Noise. Shouting. Movement where there shouldn't have been any. Then, without warning, Don Rickles burst through the curtains, unannounced, unscheduled, still wearing makeup from another show taped next door. "Johnny," he shouted, "I heard you were saying terrible things about me." The audience exploded. Carson didn't. His eyes flicked toward the wings, toward producers who were equally stunned. This wasn't a bit. There was no cue card. No plan. In a fraction of a second, Johnny did what only a master could do. He embraced the chaos before it swallowed him whole. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carson said smoothly, "apparently Don Rickles has escaped from his handlers." Rickles didn't stop. He pulled up a chair. Inserted himself into the interview. Mocked Blake. Mocked Johnny. Mocked the show itself. He grabbed Carson's coffee mug, insulted NBC, wandered behind the desk, territory sacred to The Tonight Show. When he began opening drawers and pulling out Johnny's personal items on live television, the control booth lost its collective mind. "Those are private," Carson protested, half smiling, half alarmed. "Private?" Rickles barked. "Nothing's private on television." Props were touched. Set pieces were damaged. At one point, Rickles snapped the rabbit ears off a decorative television prop. Network executives watched in horror as their flagship program dissolved into an unscripted free-for-all. Cameras rolled. There was no delay. No escape. Carson tried redirecting. It didn't work. Rickles steamrolled every attempt at order. And then Johnny made a decision that defined his genius. He stopped fighting. He leaned back, lit the cigarette, and surrendered the wheel. For nearly 20 minutes, Rickles dominated the show. Blake barely spoke. The schedule evaporated. But something magical happened. The audience wasn't watching chaos. They were watching trust. Carson understood that Rickles' unpredictability was the entertainment. By letting go, Johnny preserved the moment instead of killing it. Eventually, Carson steered them to commercial. Rickles was coaxed off the set, still shouting insults and demanding promises. The show survived. More than that, it became legend. The next night, Johnny addressed it in his monologue. He joked about increased security, about Rickles being on the FBI's most wanted list. He turned near disaster into mythology, because that night proved something essential. Control isn't always about dominance. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to step aside and let lightning strike. Johnny Carson didn't lose his show that night. He proved why it was his. Shelley Winters, when the couch became a battleground. By the time Shelley Winters sat down on The Tonight Show in 1975, the atmosphere was already unstable. Truman Capote had been on earlier, promoting excerpts from Answered Prayers, a book that had set New York society on fire. Thinly veiled characters, exposed secrets, broken friendships. Johnny Carson knew the material was volatile. What he didn't know was that Shelley Winters had recognized herself in its pages, and she had come ready to explode. At first, Carson tried to keep things light. Shelley joined Truman on the couch, smiling tightly, her body coiled with energy. Johnny asked a harmless question. Had she read Truman's controversial work? Her answer came fast and loud. "I've read enough to know slander when I see it." The room shifted. Truman smiled, dismissive, almost amused. He responded with a throwaway line about fiction being more interesting than truth. That was the spark. Shelley turned toward him, face flushing red, voice rising in volume with every word. "How dare you?" she shouted. "You come into people's homes, eat their food, pretend to be their friend, and then you betray them in print." Carson tried to intervene. He leaned forward, raised a hand, gently spoke her name. Shelley ignored him completely. This wasn't a talk show exchange anymore. This was a personal reckoning unfolding in front of millions. The audience fell silent. Truman attempted to deflect with wit, suggesting that any resemblance between his characters and real people might say more about them than about his writing. It was a fatal mistake. Shelley erupted. Her words became sharper, crueler. She attacked not just his work, but him. His voice, his appearance, his life. The energy in the studio turned dangerous. Johnny's expression changed. Crew members later called it his emergency calm. He positioned himself physically between them, his body language becoming a barrier. When the shouting didn't stop, Carson made a rare call, an unscheduled commercial break. Cameras cut away just as he stood up, separating them as the argument continued off mic. During the break, producers rearranged the set. Chairs moved. Distance created. Damage control in motion. When the show returned, Carson addressed the audience with restrained humor. "I want to assure everyone at home that no authors or actresses were harmed in the making of this program." Nervous laughter followed. But Johnny never lost control again. He directed questions carefully, interrupted strategically, maintained eye contact like a referee in a cage match. By the time the segment ended, relief washed over the room. Carson signed off quietly, muttering under his breath, still audible, hoping for different guests next time. That night wasn't memorable because of insults or shouting. It endured because it showed the fragility of control. How quickly art, ego, and resentment can turn civil conversation into confrontation. And how a great host doesn't dominate chaos, he contains it. Oliver Reed, when control finally slipped. By 1975, Oliver Reed's reputation arrived before he did. A brilliant actor, a notorious drinker, a man whose talent and self-destruction were locked in a permanent embrace. When Reed was booked on The Tonight Show, producers were already uneasy. By the time he reached the green room, their fear was confirmed. He wasn't tipsy. He was deep into the night already, and the night hadn't even begun. Staff offered water. Anything to slow him down. Reed scoffed. Scotch or nothing, love. Word reached Johnny Carson before the introduction. A warning, not a suggestion. Johnny nodded. He'd handled drunks before. He believed he could handle this too. He couldn't. Reed stumbled onto the set, collapsing into the guest chair like gravity had suddenly doubled. The audience laughed at first, then stopped. This wasn't swagger. It was imbalance. Carson opened with a standard question about Reed's latest film, throwing him a lifeline. Reed ignored it completely and launched into a rambling monologue that bounced from childhood memories to bar fights to sexual innuendo, some aimed uncomfortably close to Johnny himself. Carson nodded. Tried redirects. None worked. Reed never paused long enough to be redirected. It wasn't a conversation. It was a flood. Words slurred together. Thoughts collided. The host's famous technique, wait, pivot, guide, failed in real time. The tension escalated when Reed attempted to stand and demonstrate a stunt. He nearly fell, grabbing Carson's desk for balance, knocking over Johnny's coffee mug and spilling water across his notes and suit. For a split second, Carson's composure cracked. Real concern flashed across his face. This wasn't awkward anymore. It was unsafe. Behind the cameras, producers panicked. Discussions began about cutting the segment mid-interview, something almost never done. Johnny made the call. Calmly, gracefully. He ended the segment early, thanking Reed and suggesting they continue the conversation another time. To viewers at home, it felt smooth. To the crew, it was an emergency extraction. As cameras cut to commercial, Reed kept talking, unaware the interview was over. He followed Carson around the set, still rambling, until security gently guided him away. He never returned to The Tonight Show. Later, Carson was unusually quiet about the incident. He didn't mock it. He didn't replay it. When asked years later, he chose restraint. Oliver Reed is a tremendously talented actor who was having an enthusiastic evening. But those who were there knew the truth. That night marked one of the few times Johnny Carson admitted defeat, not to chaos, but to concern. The show wasn't worth the risk. The spectacle wasn't worth the cost. And in that moment, the greatest host in television history showed why he deserved the title, not by letting the train wreck unfold, but by stopping it before it went too far. Why these moments still matter. When people remember The Tonight Show, they remember the jokes, the celebrities, the effortless laughter. What they don't always remember is how fragile that control really was. Because live television isn't about perfection, it's about pressure. And across 3 decades, Johnny Carson sat at the center of it, night after night, holding the line between entertainment and disaster. Each of these guests arrived for different reasons. Some were too honest. Some were too drunk. Some were angry, fearless, uninhibited, or simply unaware of the rules they were breaking. But they all shared one thing. They tested the system. And in doing so, they revealed something rare. They revealed the true measure of a great host. Carson didn't dominate chaos by force. He didn't humiliate people for ratings. When things went off the rails, he adjusted, sometimes with humor, sometimes with restraint, sometimes with compassion. He knew when to laugh it off, when to surrender, and when to stop everything altogether. That instinct is why these moments still resonate today. Not because they were shocking, but because they were real. In an era before publicists rehearsed every sentence, before delay buttons became shields, television occasionally showed us something raw. Human beings cracking under lights, pressure, ego, and excess. And sitting across from them was a man whose greatest skill wasn't control, it was judgment. That's why these interviews aren't just viral clips. They're reminders of a time when anything could happen, and sometimes did. When live TV meant risk. When composure mattered. And when one man, night after night, proved that grace under fire isn't about never losing control. It's about knowing exactly what to do when you do. Johnny Carson didn't just host chaos. He survived it. If these moments shocked you, you haven't seen the worst yet. There are still more nights when Johnny Carson nearly lost control, and moments television tried to forget. So hit like if you felt the tension, subscribe if you respect real live TV, and stay right here, because the next story goes even further off the rails.